Marlon.
To hop on here. Some people are still connecting to their audio. Well, as people are coming in, let me start by saying thanks to all of you for joining. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. Fun technology stuff going on, but so this is our second small group session. Today we're particularly focused on the COVID-19 guidance as it relates to Preschool Promise, and the waiver guidance as well. So COVID-19 and waiver are the hot topics for today's discussion. If you have questions that aren't related, that's totally fine. Last time we were able to cover a wide range of topics. We'll just ask that you kind of hold off on those until we get everybody's questions answered regarding COVID, the COVID-19 guidance and the waiver guidance, get those handled and make sure that we're respectful of everybody who joined specifically for that purpose. And then as we have time, we'll get to whatever else we can. So a few things about this meeting. We're really excited to be able to offer a smaller group Q&A style session. You're welcome to speak out. You're welcome to use the chat to ask your questions. We just ask that you be conscientious of, if you've already had a lot of time to speak or ask those questions, that you give space for others to do so. And then we always have to put out the small caveat that while we will do our best to answer any questions that you have here, there's always a chance that you have one that we can't answer right away, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible with that. So with that, really quickly, for those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Angela Stinson, Communication and Stakeholder Engagement Coordinator for Preschool Promise, and I have two other ELD staff here co-hosting with me today. We have Dana. Dana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. This is Dana Young, and I'm the Preschool Promise Program Manager here at the ELD. Welcome.
And we have Crystal Garcia.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Crystal Garcia. I'm a program support specialist here at the ELD.
Awesome. And you can feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, but to save us all time and make sure we get questions answered, we will open the floor to all of you. Again, this is just like very informal office hour style Q&A session. It's yours to direct as you see fit as far as which questions you have and whether you want to use the chat or you want to just speak up. So with that, does anybody have a question to start us off? Go for it, Robert.
Hey, everybody. I didn't realize that perhaps I needed to fill out COVID waivers for this particular fiscal year. With OPK and our federal Head Start, it was just kind of a given that, we're doing what we can. So maybe you could speak to what it is I need to complete for you.
Sure. Dana, do you want me to tackle that first one or do you want to go for it? Okay, I'll start. So yeah, COVID, we are operating a little bit differently from OPK. So just to overview, we are not at this point, with everything COVID related, I feel like you have to say right now at this moment in time, but we are not accepting alternative service waivers. So we're not accepting hybrid models or distance learning models. We have some essential guidance around COVID-19 as far as we'd like to be notified if you have a mandatory program closure or classroom closure. We'd ask you to notify your hub so that they're not trying to enroll children while you have a mandated closure. And then we ask that folks report closures in their monthly report and document the missed hours due to COVID, because while we're not, while Office of Child Care is not, tracking COVID exposures and cases and classroom closures across licensed childcare, we're still trying to get a picture of how COVID-19 is impacting Preschool Promise specifically, particularly around like how many in-classroom hours children are actually getting, and how COVID is impacting that. So ask you to complete the that section of the monthly report that says like how COVID impacted your program for this particular month. That's a great place to document the closure. And Kristen, I just see your follow-up question, if we need any supporting documentation. No, not at this time. We haven't had anybody try to pull a fast one about COVID-19 closure. So if you notify us and say, hey, I talked to my local health authority, they've required that I close until November 4th. We'll say, thank you for notifying us. We hope everybody stays healthy. Please document that in your monthly report. That's kind of how that's the basic framework for right now. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that would definitely answer a piece of it. It just sparks some new ones for me. So right now we've had to reduce our daily hours. We've rolled back to a 5-hour day, and that's really due to staffing concerns. Because when we've got all the folks on quarantine, we don't have, high quality folks to get in our classrooms and retain that safety standard. So I heard that I don't need to fill out specific paperwork to communicate that. I just need to fill out my monthly report and document hours.
Dana, do you want to take
Yeah, for that one, Robert, great question. You will need to go ahead and submit a waiver because it is a grant requirement to go ahead and do the minimum of 6 hours. And we know this is a new one, right? We knew that some people need a little bit transition, COVID and all that, but yeah, definitely you'll need to go ahead and submit a waiver for that if you guys are making any adjustments to the daily hour requirement.
It looks like we've had a few other folks join us. If you're just joining, welcome. We just went over really quickly that, this is conversational office hour style Q&A session. You're welcome to add questions to the chat. You're welcome to speak them out as there's space. Happy to take them either way. Our specific topics for today are regarding COVID-19 and the waiver guidance, two separate but could definitely be related topics. We'll answer as best we can. What we can't answer today, we'll answer as soon as possible. And I see one other question in the chat, but anybody else, please feel free to jump out. I see Kristen asked, since we're part of a school district, does that determination made by the district suffice? I'm sure they are cooperating with our local health department. So Kristen, if it's a mandated closure, I'm assuming this is about like a mandatory closure, and maybe you can
totally. I could just hop on and say that just today, a full Preschool Promise classroom was sent into quarantine in our district. I sent the email to the PSP at state.or.us, but I want to make sure I didn't have to do anything else. And if the school district's determination that they needed to quarantine was sufficient, or if that needed to come from the public health department.
No, good question. I think that's sufficient. And I think we would also assume the same, that the district is cooperating with the local health authority or making a decision based off of health authorities recommended guidelines. And that's totally sufficient. I just wanted to clarify because we do have some programs where their overarching backbone agency has said like, hey, we're just not comfortable, period. Like we're we're closing down for a longer period of time, not for quarantine purposes, but for XYZ. And that is handled differently. You know, we are really trying to be cooperative and collaborative, but also sticking to expectation outlined in the grant agreement this year. So thanks.
Got it. Thank you so much for clarifying.
My pleasure. Not seeing anything else in the chat. Does anybody else have a question regarding COVID-19 and or the waiver guidance?
I had a question about a waiver for the teacher compensation aspect. It's kind of both a comment and a question. We had a waiver for our first year. Do we need to repeat waivers for the second year? And our staff are members of a union, and so the negotiation for their compensation occurs at the union and administrative level, and so we have very little say in that. So that's what I've put in the waiver previously, but I continue to advocate for the staff through whatever channels I have. Are you guys working on that issue at all also? From your end, and do you have any creative strategies that people have used in that space?
Thank you, Becky. So yes, for like everybody, the waivers are only for like per program year. So in every year you do need to go ahead and like resubmit the waivers and stuff. We're hopeful that with the new system that we have available right now, like with the form, we made some improvements on the form. So we're hoping that for next year, it's kind of like the same form, same process, but you do need to go ahead and like resubmit it every year. As far as like that, Becky, we are not currently working on that, though I'll go ahead and make note of that as far as like the salary and stuff. But that's not something that we're actively working on. You know, right now we just have like our requirements and here's the guidelines, but as far as like talking to other groups, and that's not something that we're actively doing, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do that in the future. So I'll definitely pass that on to our director of early learning programs.
Yeah, it would be helpful if it happened at the ELD to institution level, because we're sort of powerless to influence that union issue, whereas ELD might have an ability to talk across to either the institution or the union. So for example, you know, Head Start union is the universities or community colleges, and anyone who's a part of the union for the childcare providers as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight, Becky, and we'll definitely take it back. It's interesting. I just talked about this recently with our program unit supervisor, and talked about you know, our desire for programs to be doing exactly what you've said you're doing, to advocate for, you know, closing that wage gap for early educators, and when there's a union issue or you know, contract barring that. But I think you're right, there's definitely a space for ELD to kind of push back on that too. So thanks. Ramesh said, if we close due to COVID quarantine and we do not meet the 900 hours because of quarantine, do we need to add more hours to cover those hours? You don't, although we certainly appreciate if you have space in your calendar year to add an additional hour, tack on a Friday, you know, here and there. We definitely appreciate it, but we're not requiring it at this point. We're asking that you document it so that we have a clear record of, you know, hey, this program had planned 900 hours but they had 2 quarantine periods over the course of the program year. Therefore, they're only meeting 845 hours or et cetera, for example. So you do not need to make up those hours, though we appreciate it if you can. We're just asking that you document it at this point.
If it will be loss of hours because of the weather, do you think we would need to came up with a difference or not?
You're asking like if there's a inclement weather, like if there's a snowstorm or an ice storm or something and you miss time. Dana, do you want to respond to that one?
Yes.
Yeah, for those, I mean, it's always best practice to go ahead and attempt to make up those hours. And I know some programs, what they do is they'll go ahead and maybe plan for 930 hours to kind of like, maybe a little bit more to cover for that. But if you just did it right on the dot, definitely best practice to go ahead and just try to go ahead and do the best you can. And if you cannot, then we'll need to go ahead and submit a waiver, but always try to make up those hours. I'm going to go ahead and come back for just a moment. I have some mother duties right now that I need to attend to, so I'll be right back.
No problem, Dana. And I'll just piggyback on that, Valentina. We do differentiate a little bit. We're not asking for you to submit a waiver for lost hours due to COVID at this point. But if you lose hours due to an ice storm and you don't anticipate being able to make them up, we do ask you to submit a waiver. Excuse me.
We did in our calendar, we have like over 100 extra hours. So
Okay.
that's probably.
So hopefully, yeah, I'm knocking on wood over here, but hopefully that means that there won't be any issues for you. Thanks.
Last year, we applied for a waiver for our teacher due to COVID. They did not receive step 8 on time, and we got the waiver, but she mentioned especially she gave some extra time until July or August, but or did not, even with that extra time, or did not approve that. And we start in September, we start with the same teacher without step 8, but she already got it. So at this point, I have step 8, and do I have to submit the waiver or request just for that week or 2 when she was without that step 8? Do you think yes or not? Or?
That's a great question. So it sounds like you're saying when at the very start of the program year, she wasn't approved to be a step 8, but she is by now. Is that right?
Yes, she was okay. We have a waiver from last year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like school year, like it was this year, but it was school year. That okay. Anyway.
Yes.
And in July, the new school year starts. So basically, we start our program on September 8th, 7, 9, whatever. So the first few weeks, she, I would say 1 month, she was without the waiver and without the approved step 8. But for Aura, it takes like 6 or not 6, maybe 4 months to approve her, maybe more. And that was not our fault or either her fault, but now she is step 8. So you can answer later because it's not in her questions. I just want to make sure that we covered.
Yes, I think absolutely, absolutely fine for her to continue as a step 8. Ideally, so I'm waffling a little bit on my response here because really, of course, she can continue in her position. She's qualified, and even if she was in the process, just waiting on Oro to get that approval, that's something you could submit a waiver for, and we would okay it, and be like, yep, she's right there. We're just waiting on Oro to finalize it for her. the reason I'm just hesitant is I'm thinking, do we want to put a waiver on record just for documentation? You know, that might be helpful. So let me get back to you if that's okay. Because you know, I understand it doesn't make a lot of sense to ask for something when you're already meeting the requirement, but we might want it just as documentation. So if it's okay, I'll get back to you with that one. Thanks, Valentina.
Made her ask for the having like step 8 because well she did everything what she could and it was behind her ability to recall or like every week, but that's impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Welcome back, Dana. So we have a question that's not Ramesh. I see your question. I'm gonna hold off on it just for a moment to make sure that we answer any other questions related to COVID-19 or the waiver guidance or waiver form. So did anybody have, and I have a direct question also that's I'm going to pause on just for a moment to make sure that if other people have questions that are related to COVID-19 or waivers, that we answer those first. Anybody else? Okay. Oh.
Question regarding shields and masks.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, maybe it's not related. It's related to COVID.
COVID. Yeah, sure.
And I knew that shields were approved working with younger kids. It's so hard for them to understand when the full face is covered and they do not see lips and whatever. So at this moment, I missed it, and maybe if you have, I apologize for asking that, but if you could just maybe make sure that I'm following. Can we get back to shields or not?
That's a great question. So for preschool promise, we don't get to make those questions or answer those questions, make those guideline decisions on our own. Right now, my understanding is that it's a mask, not a face shield, and that's been in effect since August 13th. As far as whether or not we transition back to allowing face shields over face masks, that's probably going to depend on a lot of factors that we don't have control over, like what, you know, the numbers that we continue to see as far as transmission in communities and what's happening with the Delta variant or any other future variants that hopefully aren't coming our way, but you know, may. And so unfortunately, you know, from a preschool promise perspective, we don't have the authority to say, you know, sure, wear a face shield rather than a face mask. We have to go off of what Office of Child Care has put out in cooperation with Oregon Health Authority. And right now that's a face mask. So if that changes, we'll certainly update you. Thanks for asking.
I was just wondering if they start visitation, if they open visitation to the sites, then why they would, it's strangers coming inside, and why the approved teacher and kids like being in the same group all the time, why they have to wear a mask, not why they not allowed to wear shields when it's so helpful in education, in communication, in understanding, in everything. That's kind of, is it possible to send a request somewhere, or maybe if a lot of people will be talking about this, and I know it's not just our program. The problem, I mean, I don't know the word to say it, but I believe that every center or daycare would love to have that changed. But maybe if we will get this more louder, maybe they would be heard. Because if it's still so dangerous, then we're not supposed to have visitations, strangers coming in. I don't know if would be bringing inside. Why they would be coming to the center.
Sure. And I think, you know, Valentina, just totally respect where you're coming from. And I know that there's a lot of feelings around face masks and various COVID-19 requirements and regulations. And those have been particularly challenging for early educators in the field who are working with young children. I totally understand that. The only thing I can say is I think the shift back to in-person visits as far as like licensing goes, it's always a balance of risk, you know, wanting to make sure that somebody is in person, viewing the childcare space and ensuring safety. Licensing staff were required to be vaccinated or have an approved exemption by October 18th. So there's that reduction of risk that I think they were waiting for before starting in-person visits. Obviously that doesn't completely, you know, 100% get rid of the risk. I understand that, but I think that's the rationale there, although I won't attempt to speak for all the different parties that are involved in creating that ever-evolving COVID-19 guidance, but certainly reach out to your like-minded community members and you know, voice your opinion where it's appropriate and where it makes sense to you. We have some other questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. Let's see. So Dana, okay. Will Preschool Promise start increasing funding for extra staff for programs with children on an IFSP? ERDC provides extra financial support for children on an IFSP, and it would be great if in the near future Preschool Promise would address this also.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing that up. But we're looking to go ahead and do next year is like how do we support like inclusionary practices, right, with some of our funding. So definitely that's something that we're continuously working on. I think now that on our manual, we have a little bit more, you know, more instructions for our grantees on inclusionary practices that has been brought up. It's like, so what will be some of those additional supports? So just stay tuned for more information, you know, as we continuously like look into that on how do we support that, especially with staff funding or some other resources there.
And then since it was a direct message, I won't say your name, but feel free to speak up if you want to add to this. But a question about when filling out the site information form, this grantee wasn't able to enter text that they're using their own curriculum. The predetermined categories were the only options. So that's a form error. If that's the case, you should be able to enter your own curriculum that you're using. And it has thrown folks off because it looks like a drop-down menu with just two choices, but you should be able to click on the actual box itself and type in text. And I hope that is functioning, because if not, we might have to go back and confirm with a few people. And then same grantee said that they really loved the equity survey, which is fantastic to hear. And asked if it was possible to get a copy of the questions. And yes, I actually just got a copy of the PDF of the survey from the research team that developed it, and hope to put that out in next week's bulletin. So thanks for that. Dana Ramesh asked, does Preschool Promise foresee an increase in per funding slot to be competitive with Preschool Promise for All? Preschool for All, which is, for those of you who are not familiar, program in Multnomah County that recently passed, which is moving toward like a universal early care and education model for the community, for the county. They are set to pay more with similar hours requirement and only a step 7 for lead teacher. Is there a benefit for Multnomah providers to have PSP over Preschool for All?
Thank you for bringing that question. Our funding works a little bit different, as in like we get a lump sum from legislation, or we are kind of like told like, how many slots do you need to go ahead and like, do we need to go ahead and like expand or offer? I think when, when it comes to like some of those programs, I don't really foresee as a matter of like competition among both programs and which ones you should go ahead and go for which. I think it's more from like you guys as a provider, like what will make most sense for you in the program and the families that you serve. So like in some cases, like some programs are gonna, because there's no limitations, at least from Preschool Promise, that you can be like both of them. You can definitely be like both providers, like if you wanted to, or like I believe in that area, we also have like Baby Promise, so you can actually be like triple funded in a way too. So I think that's kind of like where we're leaning towards, is that it is, I don't see it as like competition, like you got to choose one, Robert. It's I know it's like what's in the most interest of your program, because you can definitely go ahead and blend. So it's just a matter, I think what brings us like with the opportunity as we move forward is like, how do we provide additional like TA to our grantees on how to blend funds and what are the do's and don'ts with funds. We know that we have some Preschool Promise in OPK. We know that we have Preschool Promise and Baby Promise, relief nurseries and so on. So that is one thing that as a team in our program unit, like we talk about, is like, how do we provide more of that guidance? But it's not a competition. It's more about how do you want to go ahead and inject those two fundings into your program. As far as like the funding, for right now, it's like we were able to go ahead and do an increase for this program year just based on our funding. I think it's just a matter of like looking and what other resources and support can we go ahead and provide to our grantees. So hope that answers the question there. Thank you.
Yeah. I love how you answered that, Dana, and I totally agree that this is, we like to think of it as like layers on a cake, right? It's just good on top of good. It's not things that are competing with each other. It's a phenomenal community investment that community decided to make on top of a state investment that the state has committed to make. It's just extra good news for young children in Oregon. So that's how we're looking at it. And we also know that it's going to take time for Preschool for All to ramp up. And so there's that as well. So we're excited for it. We're excited for children in Multnomah County to have even more opportunity to be served and for their families to have even more opportunity to be served. So that's thrilling. And we, like Dana said, don't see this as a Preschool Promise versus Preschool for All. We see this as like, teammates to serve as many children in Oregon as possible. It looks like we've covered everything in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions? It seems like we've steered away from COVID-19 and waivers so far. So if you have anything unrelated, feel free to bring it forward. Or if you do have something about COVID-19 or waivers that didn't get answered yet, feel free to speak up.
Since nobody asked, I will ask. I had some problems to connect to the meeting, and would you send all the information that you are talking, or I can find it on the frequent last question, or I was late for I didn't hear the beginning of the program, so where I will be able to find information that I missed.
Sorry, Valentina. It sounded you're breaking up quite a bit for us. I couldn't totally understand. It sounded like if you're asking for.
I missed the beginning of the session, and where I can find it, or can you summarize it and do it, since nobody has questioned?
Sure. Yeah. So you didn't miss terribly much. I think we just said at the beginning of the session that this is the goal of these sessions is to try to offer something that Preschool Promise has been wanting to offer and has been trying to find capacity to offer for quite a while, which is a smaller, less formal, conversational question and answer type of group on specific topics. Sorry, distracted by something in the chat, but so that's the goal, and that people can ask questions through the chat or they can speak up. So that was really all that we covered. I think the very first question we talked about was around requirements concerning COVID-19 quarantine or COVID-19 period. And we talked about, if there's a quarantine period that you're required to do, if you're required to shut down, you do not need to submit a waiver to us. We ask that you email the Preschool Promise inbox, psp@state.or.us, that you also email your hub so that they're not trying to enroll children while you're closed. And then that you document the closure in your monthly report. And then I think the follow-up question that Robert had right at the get-go was, if you have another COVID-19 impact that's not related to a closure, like if you're having issues with staffing or et cetera, that's impacting your ability to serve children at the level in the grant agreement, you do need to request a waiver for that. So that is handled separately. So I think that's all that we covered at the very beginning before you hopped on, but this whole session is recorded and all the recordings will be sent out in the bulletin. So a question in the chat around SharePoint and asking if there's an alternative way to get the information that lives on the site. So just as an FYI, nothing is put on SharePoint that we haven't first sent out in the bulletin. So if you receive the weekly bulletins, you will receive what is available on SharePoint. All of our report links that are available on SharePoint have gone out in the weekly bulletin. All of the TA documents that we reviewed at the kickoff meeting are now on SharePoint, but those were also first shared in the bulletin. So that's kind of the practice, is like making sure it goes out in the bulletin first and then moving it over to the SharePoint site. With that said, I totally understand that it's tricky to like go back through a series of bulletins and hunt for information, and it's easier if it's all on one site and you can access it. But we do have a handful of folks that are having just repetitive mystery issues with getting access to the SharePoint site. And I'm working with the IT department over at ODE to try and resolve it. But in the meantime, everything that's on SharePoint, if you are receiving our weekly bulletins, you've seen it. It's not new info. And if you're having trouble hunting something down, feel free to email us anytime. If you're, trying to hunt down a report link and can't seem to find it, that's no problem. So thanks for that question. Anybody else in our last 15 minutes or so?
Well, while you guys think about more questions, I'll go ahead and give you guys some reminders. So do not forget to go ahead and submit your site information report. It's super important for us to go ahead and get all of your site information. We did hit a little bit of a error message. I believe some grantees ended up filling out the old site information. We since deactivated everything from last year. So please, if you receive an email like this week reminding you that we have not yet received your site report, is because we really haven't. So those site reports are due within 30 days of your grant agreement execution, as well as your budget. Failure to go ahead and like submit those on a timely fashion may result in some delays of your funding. So just go ahead and get that in. If you need any kind of like TA or questions, or you're not sure what links to go ahead and click on, please send us an email or give us a call. Love to go ahead and get your feedback on like this type of sessions, because we are looking to do a little bit more for you guys as the year goes by.
Hi, Snoopy. Yes, as Dana said, I'll throw up the poll in just a minute here to get kind of feedback on how these small group sessions work for you. Somebody already sent me a direct message saying that these have been really helpful, so thank you for that. Autumn mentioned that the fiscal and reporting guidance sessions that we just sent out today, it looks like they might already be full. We did put out 2 sessions in English, 1 session in Spanish. Per our grants and ops team's request, we did cap those at a smaller number. So there may be a need to do additional sessions. And we hope to be absolutely responsive to that if that's the need. We're going to start with those first 3, and those will all be recorded. And if there's a need for additional sessions, then we'll make sure to work with that team to try and schedule those as soon as possible. Ramesh asked, and Dana, I think this is a good one for you. Can we apply for additional slots when the next grant application comes out?
Absolutely, like existing preschool promise grantees are eligible for the expansion RFA when it comes out. So then I think that leaves you guys with the opportunity right now to go ahead and take a look at your program, take a look at the families that you're serving, your location, and as far as like what capacity will you be able to go ahead and add more if you wanted to go ahead and add some additional slots in the RFA.
And I'll do a quick plug while we're waiting to see if anybody has any final questions. Maybe we'll sign off a little bit early, but I did put in the chat the waiver guidance document, which we sent out through the Gov Delivery Bulletin, and it's also available on SharePoint, that just kind of covers some considerations to think about when you're applying for a waiver, gives examples of things that we would consider, some things that we're not considering this year, like the alternative service delivery models, and then also put in there the COVID-19 guidance, which covers that guidance on if you have a mandatory quarantine, who to notify at a minimum if you do have a mandatory quarantine, and answers that question about making up lost hours if possible, but not being required to. So quick plug there. And then Nicole asked, is there a time frame for when the next program year RFA will come out?
Great question. We started sharing November. That's our deadline, as we are. However, we're still working with DOJ and procurement on like getting everything ready. So I don't have an exact date per se. The other thing, if any of you have like any questions regarding like payments or like fiscal stuff, you can definitely go ahead and ask those questions now too. We know that the process changed like this program year, and maybe a little bit, it's a 4-step process, but I think that has gotten a little bit confusing too. So by all means, if you guys have any questions, we want to make sure that you guys get paid.
Absolutely. And then I have a question as a direct message, which is that for future enrollment, is there consideration for families who do not meet the income requirements? My site is in a rural area in a childcare desert, 15 miles from the nearest childcare facility or grocery store. And I have several openings in my classroom and several families who are just above the income cutoff. Will there be any considerations made in the future for rural sites? So exciting news for you. There already are considerations for rural sites. You have the option of talking to your hub, your early learning hub, and submitting something that's called a FAR waiver, no pun intended, but it's a frontier and rural waiver, where, you know, in collaboration with your hub, you demonstrate that you're it as far as childcare options go within your community, and that you know, that the families that are around would really benefit from being, you know, served, and that there's not other options available to them. So that is certainly something for you to explore with your hub.
And then just to go ahead and add a little bit more to it, we have been getting the question, like if preschool promise goes above the 200% poverty level, kind of like similar to OPK in certain situations, and we don't. I know that OPK Head Start, they can maybe go up to like the 130. We're really capped at the 200, but definitely for those rural, you know, areas, definitely work with your hub as far as like a FAR waiver.
Okay. Not seeing anything else in the chat.
But it's next
Oh.
forever. I have a question. Last year, we got a schedule or kind of a calendar for all the reports on one page with links. And is it possible, Dana, I'm not sure who created, but for me, that was so helpful. Is it possible to do it this year? I know you include all the connection or links in the contract or not the contract. That was really helpful too, but to have everything in one page was wonderful. If it's possible to do it, please do it.
More good news. We have it. So I'll put the link in the chat. Yeah, it went, it was shared in our kickoff meeting and went out in the bulletin, and it's also available on SharePoint on the tools tab. So it's home, overview, enrollment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tabs over on our SharePoint site. And it's, if you see the kickoff documents, that's pinned to the top of that. So I'll put that link in the chat here just for your convenience. But yes, we have that report checklist, and I'm so happy that that's been helpful to you, and that I'm happy that we have it again. So I'll put it in here.
I think if there's no additional questions, we can give you guys back some of your time in the day. I know you guys have been working really hard. We are looking to go ahead and do more of this session. So definitely like getting your feedback. And also, you know, we really want to go ahead and do a lot of like relationship building with our grantees, making sure that you guys are fully supported with the implementation of Preschool Promise. So sounds like you guys didn't have many questions this time, but definitely, think of more questions, and we look forward to going to meeting with you guys again and making sure that your questions get answered. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm going to throw a poll up for those of you who have a moment before you head out. Thanks so much for joining, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you, girls. Thank you, Dana.
Nice seeing you, Valentina. Thank you.
Angela, I had a question. Angela, should I ask Dana the waiver? Remember you told me that we're supposed to, you gave us a waiver for teachers. And one teacher, we were waiting for the step 8 until September.
Sure. I can recap really quick and see if Dana knows. So Dana, they had a teacher who was previously on a waiver because she was not yet a step 8. She started the program year as not a step 8, but her step 8 was in process. Oro was processing it. So Valentina did not yet submit a waiver for that staff member for this program year. And now that staff member has received her step 8. Does she need to go back and submit a waiver because for the first month and a half of the program year, the teacher was not yet a step 8, or is it now she's a step 8, we don't need to go back and retroactively give with her?
We'll document it so that way you don't have to do it again. You don't need to submit the waiver. You're fine. And congratulations. That's awesome that she said step 8. Because I know you've been working really hard, Valentina. So thank you.
She was definitely, it was so stressful. But anyway, and I'm almost done on my year. So it's just so hard with all these reports, so many documents, so much documents, and running the class or school, and it's a lot of problems. And I don't know, thank you for being nice and waiting for us.
Share the results really quick. I don't know if all of you can see this. Looks like my computer's being a little funky, but the 9 people that submitted the poll said they would like to see more sessions like this. So 100%. So we'll definitely try and make that happen. Thanks you all so much for joining. We hope to talk to you soon. Our email address is in the chat box if any other questions come up. Have a great day.